I'm Betsy Bella. I'm part of the support team for the DDS STEP efforts. Joined today by Julie and Owen, who are also part of this team. And I'll go ahead and pass it off to Owen.
All right, thanks, Betsy. Good morning, everybody. Like Betsy said, it's awesome to see some new faces and some folks that have not joined our TA sessions before. We hope this will be pretty informative today. We're going to be chatting mostly about what the STEP incentives are and how to earn them. So I think it'll be a really good jumping off point for those of you that have not been far along in the STEP process yet. So before we jump in, just some quick refreshers on Zoom, because I know a lot of folks are used to Teams. But we do have closed captions enabled. So there's a button there to do that. I believe somebody has already selected it. And then we hope that this will be pretty conversational and an open discussion. So if you all have questions, feel free to come off mute and interrupt us, or to send a message in the chat, whatever you're more comfortable with, and we can address questions that way. But yeah, would love your participation and excited to chat through some of this today. Before we do get into the content, I'm going to launch a poll quickly just to get a sense of where people are in terms of STEP planning efforts. So if you all can, when you see this poll, respond and just let us know if you haven't started, if you're very far along and maybe you've submitted, or if you're in progress. That would be super helpful. And then I'll share the results once we have everybody submitted. I think we've got about half of folks responding. Okay, let's keep them still going up. Okay, looks like as usual, we have a pretty good balance. Most folks have not started, one person in progress, and then several folks that have already submitted and been approved. So I will go ahead and end that poll. I know I just went over this, but so you all can see, this is kind of what the composition of the group is this morning. So yeah, I think there's something for everybody here today. And like I said, as we go, feel free to interrupt and ask questions. But I think with that, I will jump into the actual incentives. So the way that the incentives for STEP are categorized is in a couple of different ways. The first chunk of them is what we call transition incentives. So these are what a provider would be eligible for if they are moving an individual from a congregate residential or day setting into an independent living setting, or if they're coming from a non-employment day setting to a vocational support, or if they're coming from a group employment support moving into an independent employment support. So the next three incentives I'm going to talk through are all available to providers if an individual is transitioning as part of their larger STEP plan. And then Betsy will talk a little bit more about some of the other incentives that are available with or without a transition. So first here we have what we call STEP incentives. And these are the transitions these are the incentives that a provider receives once a transition has happened successfully. So this is for both residential and day transitions. This incentive is available, but the value of the incentive is different in either case. So on the residential side, there's a lump sum payment of $33,500 for each person that successfully transitions. And the way that DDS has defined a successful transition is that the individual transitions and then remains in that new support for at least 60 days. So on the residential side, an example of this would be an individual that was previously in a CLA setting and then moved into IHS and then remained in that IHS for 60 days. And as we go throughout the discussion, I'll just give you all some examples of providers that have actually been approved for their STEP plans and what this looks like in practice. So here, the Arc of Eastern Connecticut submitted a plan that was approved for STEP, where they went through this exact process. They have slated several individuals to move from CLA arrangements into cluster IHS with augmented assistive technology capabilities. And this is an example of a provider that was able to leverage STEP and STEP funding to push forward some of their long-term priorities that had already existed before STEP. And so it's really been an opportunity for them to move some things forward that they had already planned and that had been on their mind strategically for quite some time. On the day side, it works very similarly. This is also a one-time lump sum incentive, but it's $15,000 per individual. Whether they're moving from a non-employment setting to a vocational setting or from a group employment setting to an individualized employment setting. And I'll note here that this is a little bit different than residential because essentially any increase in hours of competitive employment or in vocational supports counts as a successful transition as long as they remain in that support for the 60 days. So the expectation in many cases is that individuals that are coming from, say, a GSE into ISE, that they would actually maintain potentially some of their previous hours. And this is especially common with DSO to round out their schedules if their hours of competitive employment supports are maybe reduced from what they were used to in the past. So the example that we have here is, like I said, an individual transitioning from a DSO to GSE, which would be non-vocational day into a vocational program, or from GSE into ISE, congregate employment into individualized employment. And here, one of the providers we wanted to mention is the Kennedy Collective, and their program is going to shift individuals from GSE supports into competitive ISE. And they'll be using their STEP funding from this to organize additional staff hours to provide on-site onboarding for many of the individuals that are moving into ISE, where they might need extra job coaching above their typical levels. So the STEP funding will be really helpful to allow for that front end training to make sure that they're comfortable in the new support and are set up for success in that way. So that there is the first round of incentives. These are the lump sum payments, like I said, for successful transitions. And the next set we wanted to talk about is the provider transition incentive. So obviously still associated with a transition. And actually, I think before we move on, I can take a question. I see, James, you have your hand up.
Thanks. I was wondering about if they're TES to ISC or GSC qualified at all for that $15,000 incentive, or is it just DSO and GSC programs?
No, ETS is also eligible. ETS to an individualized employment support. So either ISC or customized employment would be eligible here. ETS to GSE would not, because that's still a congregate employment support to a congregate employment support.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. And there are cases, which we'll talk about a little bit, where if there's an intermediate step in a larger transition, if for some reason somebody's moving from ETS to GSE and then ultimately into ISE, that like larger transition can still be part of STEP. You just won't be incentivized for the first leg of it. Okay. So next we have the provider transition incentives, and they work very similarly for both residential and day transitions. And the purpose of this incentive, which is it's a payment that enables a provider to maintain program viability during a transitional period where somebody has left, we'll use a CLA for this example. If somebody's left a CLA that had 4 individuals in it, and now there are 3 individuals that are still in that support, the provider obviously needs to continue to maintain the same level of support for the people that are in the CLA. So DDS wants to incentivize providers that are participating in STEP with this additional funding to maintain program viability. And so they are, the way the calculation works is that a provider is paid an incentive that is equal to the current annual funding of the individual that's transitioning. So essentially, they're receiving the amount of money that they would be paid if the individual had remained in that support. And that serves a twofold purpose. First of which is program viability being maintained, and the second of which is, as part of STEP, there are a couple of safety nets involved. So for if an individual transitions out of their original support and for whatever reason they're not satisfied in their new support, they have the opportunity to move back to their specific original support within that 60-day window. And so this funding helps providers maintain that room specifically in a residential transition if an individual needs to come back. So kind of 2 purposes there. There are a few differences between the incentives for residential transitions and day and employment transitions. The largest of which is providers that are facilitating a residential transition can claim this incentive for up to 6 months. And for day and employment transitions, it can be claimed for up to 4 months. And the reason we say up to 4 months is that if for whatever reason the previous setting is filled with an individual from the emergency list or from your own waiting list, you won't be able to claim that incentive anymore, since the program will be adequately funded as you would expect prior to the person transitioning. So there are examples in approved STEP plans, like Abilis as an example, where they transitioned 2 of their individuals from CRS support, but both of those rooms were filled within 2 months and then within 4 months. So they only requested the transition incentives during those shorter periods. In general, though, providers will be requesting and claiming these incentives for the full period that they're eligible for, unless there's a case like we just mentioned. And I think that covers it for the provider transition incentive. Again, if you all have questions, feel free to raise your hand, put them in the chat. We'll also have some time for discussion. The third category of incentive I want to talk about is a placement incentive. And so these are different between residential and employment and day supports. On the residential side, we have the new residential placement incentive, which is for individuals that transition from congregate living setting into an independent living setting. This residential placement incentive is based on the number of hours that the individual has in the target support. So in this case, in the example we have here, that would be the IHS setting. And the incentive dollars are calculated by taking the current annual funding in the IHS on a weekly basis times the number of weeks that they will be in the IHS. And that's how you would get your new residential placement incentive. It's effectively an enhanced rate here that can be claimed for 20 weeks by the provider once the person is successfully placed in that new support. The incentives on the employment side work fairly similarly. There are 2, however. The first of which is the new employment focused placement incentive, which is specifically for individuals that are transitioning from a non-vocational day setting into a vocational setting. So typically either GSE or ETS. And works very similarly. You would take the target annual funding for the ultimate support, which is GSE in this case, and multiply it by the weeks that that person will be in GSE by the GSE rate. So again, we have a double rate incentive here, and it works the same for ETS or any other support like that. Whereas you can claim the residential placement incentive for a 20 weeks, this incentive can be claimed 30 hours per week for 26 weeks while the person is in that new support. And then the last placement incentive that we have here is the new individualized employment placement incentive, which works exactly the same way, but is specifically for individuals that move into either customized employment or ISE. And instead of a pure double rate, there was this enhanced rate of $71.50 an hour that was identified in the Appendix K, which is specifically paid for these transitions. But otherwise, this looks exactly the same as the other two. And it can be claimed for 25 hours per week up to 26 weeks, or however long the person remains in that support. And like I mentioned for the transition incentives, the expectation is that providers would claim these placement incentives for the maximum periods, unless something happens and that individual is either unhappy with that support and wants to move back, or for whatever reason they are no longer in that support for the full period. Otherwise, we would recommend claiming that incentive for the full time. I will stop here, and I know that's a lot of information to come very quickly, so would love to answer any questions and talk through anything that you all are thinking that way. If we don't have any questions, I know we can also continue. I would also love, I know we have kind of a smaller group today, so would love to do a couple of introductions with folks before we move into the second part of the presentation. So if you, I mean, based on hearing what you've heard about the incentives, if you can just share which agency you're from and kind of what the focus of your step plan will be, either residential day, maybe both. Any initial thoughts that you have, that would be awesome. So I will just kind of run through the list of folks as I see them on my screen. And James, I know you asked your question first, so why don't we start with you?
I'm James Hyman. I'm Director of Employment Services at the ARC Eastern Connecticut. Thank you for the shout out. I believe we're working on both residential and day, but our COO is also here, so I'll let her talk more about that when you get to her.
Alrighty, thanks, James. I see Alyssa next.
Hi, Alyssa Kachi from the Kennedy Collective. Just learned that we were involved in the STEP process a couple days ago, so I am brand new, even though my company is not.
Got it. Well, happy to answer any questions that you have. And then I see Colleen Phillips.
Hi, I'm Colleen. I work for the Baraco Corporation, and I have two DSHs in Wyndham and Gales Ferry, and we have just kind of looking at changing up some things we do in our day program. And I have some people that might be interested in moving to some limited employment.
Okay, awesome. Great to hear. I see Lucas Vale.
Morning, from Mark Inc. of Manchester. I'm the program facilitator of our new vocational transition program. Basically working to get our folks from a GSE congregate setting into ISE placements.
Got it. Thanks for sharing. And then Yvette.
Good morning. I'm Yvette Horton. I'm the COO of the ARC Eastern Connecticut. And James is correct. We are working on residential and day. We are now in the phase where our individuals have successfully lived their first month in their IHS apartment. So we are well on our way.
That's
We
really
always want
exciting.
to hear those updates.
I see Jessica Porcello.
Good morning. I am actually the financial director for Mark Inc. of Manchester, and you've already heard from Lucas. So we're looking to, again, move people from the GSE program to independent employment through a accelerated vocational program for our staff, looking to end the 14C as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we're very familiar with Mark's plan. Thanks for sharing. Karen Milani.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm Karen Milani. I'm from Life Skills Inc. in Massachusetts, and I am brand new to this.
Great. We're happy to have you.
We have a day hab program here. Actually, we have several, but we have a couple of Connecticut people here.
Okay, awesome. Who do we have next? People are jumping around on my screen. Wanda Vargas.
Good morning. I'm from the Hispanic Coalition. This is our very first time into any of this stuff as well. I'm the brand for our DDS program.
Very happy to have you. Angela Fournier.
Hi, I am with New Beginnings for Life. I am the assistant director. We are looking at this for residential and day program. I am also brand new, so I'm excited to learn.
Great. We'd love to hear that.
Thank you.
Leah Rogerson. I know a couple of folks are off video and on mute, so understandable if there's any reason you can't come off, but feel free to put your details in the chat. Carrie Ryan.
There I am. Okay. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Kari Ryan with Star, and we're working trying to move people from DSO to individual employment. And we're located down in the Norwalk area. We're very excited always about jobs. So this is really right up our alley. Thank you for doing this. This is helpful to hear all this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining. And the last person I see is Yashira Ruiz.
Good morning. My name is Yashira Ruiz. I'm in my mobile office currently, but I'm Director of Human Services for the Corporation for Public Management. We have several locations that provide day services and programs throughout the state of Connecticut. And so we're looking to expand DSO to GSE, GSE to independent employment services.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for the introductions. We're really glad to have you all here and hope that this is helpful and can get you jump started with STEP. Okay, with that, I will pass it to Betsy to talk through some of our non-transition incentives.
Thanks, Owen. All right, so if we go to the next slide, this is the restructuring incentive. So this incentive is going to provide a payment of $33,000 to providers for restructuring a congregate and or non-employment day setting. So when we talk about restructuring, what does that mean? It can mean updating a residential support to serve the needs of individuals with greater behavioral or clinical needs. This would include individuals on the residential wait list. On the day side, it can be changing a day program focused on employment-based services. This could include This must include changing to bill as an employment focused service. So for example, it wouldn't be enough to still run a DSO that just happens to have some employment activities in it, although that is definitely something people are putting in their plans, and it can be a really valuable part of your transformation. It just doesn't qualify for the restructuring incentive. For a day, it can also mean updating a congregate or non-employment support to support new individuals with specialized or complex medical needs. And if you're thinking, well, who would that be? Your DDS regional contacts can help you identify people with unmet day needs. And then also if you have a wait list that includes people who already have an authorization, but who haven't been able to receive supports, they would be eligible as well. And finally, ending a sub-minimum wage arrangement. So this would need to apply to all the individuals currently in and coming in the future in your GSE program. So when we talk about the restructuring incentives, one agency can receive separate incentives for each of the restructuring incentives up to $132,000. If you achieve one objective in two different settings though, for example, if you were to update accessibility and staffing into separate CLAs to support individuals with more complex support needs, the agency still just receives one incentive of $33,000. But if you do all four different things, then you would receive one for each. So if plans do not have to contain transitions to be eligible for this incentive. When you think about restructuring dollars, and you might be saying, well, if we're going to do something like make a bathroom accessible, add a ramp, that can all add up to more than $33,000. And the restructuring dollars aren't supposed to they're not intended to cover the expenses, but rather they're an incentive for activities that might fit into your broader strategic plans already. So for example, FAVAR, they were transitioning some individuals out of CLA settings into IHS, and that left vacancies in their CLA. So they went ahead and they're updating the CLA to be more accessible for individuals with greater behavioral and medical needs. And then as they fill in those vacancies, as they support new individuals, they will be people who are able to come off of the wait list in pieces. All STEP plans submitted with restructuring to date include transitions first and then restructure to update the setting prior to filling the vacancies. But in November, DDS did release a memo, and this updates guidance on restructuring incentives. So providers actually can submit STEP plans that are focused on only restructuring. So for example, if you have a GSC program that's currently operating at a sub-minimum wage and no one's looking to transition, they're all really interested in staying in that program, but you want to work with individuals to move to at least minimum wage and get rid of your sub-minimum wage certificate, then you would be eligible for the $33,000 restructuring incentive. This is also works for the other options as well. DDS is finalizing a shortened template for providers who are looking to submit restructuring only plans. Currently, we can provide guidance on how you can use the existing templates, but there is one coming out soon, both for day and for residential, for anyone who is interested in just restructuring, although it sounds like everyone on the call today is interested in transitions as well. And actually next Wednesday on March 20th, we're going to go do a deep dive on restructuring. All right. So if we look at the next slide, the scope incentive. Now, STEP's meant to be transformational. We're talking about transformational for DDS as they're continuing to push more and more towards creating greater opportunities for integration and independence. And also for individuals as they are having opportunities to change supports to be ones that might best fit their needs, and sort of shifting further along the spectrum of independence to be in the right spot for them. And then of course for agencies like yourselves, right? So recognizing the plans that impact that more than one setting, they really require more effort from providers, but they also lead to greater transformation. So the scope incentive provides additional funds based on the number of settings that you have in a plan. So how do you know how many programs your plan transforms? Any approved STEP plan is considered to have at least one program being transformed. And then there's the potential for addition. The reason for this is you can think of the payment for one program as an incentive to submit a plan, to coordinate with your region to get it approved. It also provides some funding upfront before other objectives and transitions are completed, right? The STEP incentives are intended to support your updates and changes and additional support to individuals as they're transitioning as necessary. But the payments come after the transitions, after the objectives. But this STEP and scope incentive, that comes up front. And then for additional settings, they need to meet one of the definitions of transformation. These are available in the provider FAQ document, which is available on the provider gateway. But the Appendix K restructuring objectives we just ran through, achieving at least one of these, that counts as restructuring a program. If you add a new program, so developing a new program that provides individualized supports to facilitate transitions from congregate to non-congregate settings, you'll need to show that this program is up and running and viable before you receive the additional incentive payment. But this could be as simple as adding assistive technology or remote supports, if not previously offered, and applied in a way that is significant for the size of your agency, right? If you have an existing really big IHS program and you're starting to add just a little bit, that's probably not significant, but it's something you'll discuss with your regions. But it could also be adding a new individualized or employment-focused support for people to transition to, such as newly offering IHS. DDS will review authorizations to confirm individuals are using the new program and to make sure that it really is going to be up and running long-term. And then there's the sort of more nebulous enhanced integration, right? So one of the overarching goals of STEP is to really provide more opportunities for individuals to be more integrated into their communities. And so one of the restructuring incentive options is if you augment, enhance, and individualize support, for example, clustered IHS, to provide more opportunities to build natural supports and integrate with the community through non-employment activities. So this is one where, again, you'll want to coordinate closely with your region and really be clear on your plans and how it's going to best meet the needs and preferences of the individuals included. So, for example, Ability Beyond, they are actually claiming the scope incentive for 3+ programs. They have both day and residential transitions, and they're also restructuring several settings. They're planning to restructure a CLA that's going to support individuals with more complex needs. They're restructuring a DSO to focus on employment-based services, and they're ending a sub-minimum wage arrangement. I will note that just because you had to put some limits somewhere, even if you're restructuring 5 programs, you're still going to receive that $17,500 block for 3+. Okay. So any questions there? Right, so I mentioned the FAQs. We're going to highlight a few pieces from some of the specific FAQs. Something that comes up frequently in these questions when we're talking about STEP incentives is, what are the restrictions? What can I spend them on? Our last TA session was on how can you invest and use your STEP incentives. But the big answer is really, there's not additional restrictions on STEP incentives once you earn them. You can invest them how you see fit. You will use them to fund the pieces needed for your STEP transitions, for supporting individuals, for the transformation. But beyond that, any excess funding, you can invest wherever is most needed for your agency. So let's say you've received your STEP incentives, you're using them. What are the reporting obligations? There is not any additional documentation other than sort of your usual processes for tracking your own funds internally. Now, Owen was talking about, when he was answering James's question, this idea of sort of a multi-stage transition with an intermediate step. So, for example, there are plans that talk about creating sort of an additional CLA. It's classified as a CLA, but it really enhances greater independence, where people are receiving some remote supports, but from on-site staff before they go into IHS. And, or for example, if people are moving through different sort of stages of employment, and depends on the context of the plan, how long individuals are going to be in the immediate setting. But there are times, especially on the employment side, where if it is representing a new support type, if they're learning new skills, you might be incentivized for 2 transition payments. But that would be, for example, you might earn that double rate for somebody who moves from DSO to GSE. Now you're getting the employment double rate. And then if they're moving from GSE then to ISE, then you would get the 7150. But you're not going to get $15,000 each time the person moves along the step. You would just receive the 2 different enhanced rates. And for the normal cost settlement processes, right now they do fall under sort of an exemption where you get to keep the funds. But that is subject to change depending on what happens. The legislation can always put out new guidelines related to cost settlement, but right now there's no additional cost settlement requirements for the STEP incentives. So please do plan to utilize the full amount of the incentives that are rewarded, and make sure that you've got plans for investing them all and getting them in. But the plan is not sort of, if you don't use your STEP incentives for your STEP transitions, then you lose the extra. You do have the opportunity to invest it back into your agency. Any questions on those? Okay. So also, since we have some folks on, who are thinking about STEP and others whose agencies are actively in the process, for the process of actually earning the incentive. So you've put in a plan, it's been approved. You're working with individuals to support transitions. And let's say somebody's transitioned, they've been in that setting for 60 days. Throughout STEP, there's really close coordination with the region. And where you're updating them on, somebody's moved, they've been in their setting for 30 days. Now they've been in their setting for 60 days. And at that 60-day mark, you will want to put in a one-time request for the STEP incentive. So you submit a one-time request for the $30,000, for the $15,000, or if it's multiple individuals, you can submit those requests together. And that way the region can process it to be able to provide you with the incentives. For the enhanced rates, that's one where you'll want to be coordinating with the region on sort of like, how often should you request that, making sure it goes through the process. Originally the hope was for DDS to be able to just sort of like automatically do it. But people are having better success if they coordinate really close with the region and do put in those one-time payment requests. And if you have an approved plan and you have not already requested your initial scope incentive of $7,500, please do coordinate with your region, put in that one-time request and get those initial funds that can really help you to begin investing in the pieces that can help with these transformations. So does anyone have any questions? I know it's been a lot of dense information today. If you don't have any questions for us, we have a question for you, which is, what kinds of incentives do you think your agencies will be eligible for? And we've highlighted some of you today, but so for folks who are thinking about submitting plans, do you see yourselves sort of on restructuring? Do you think that there are additional opportunities for you there? Are there other pieces that are coming to mind?
I can chime in.
Great.
A big focus for us is really emphasizing the transition from GSE services to ISE services, especially in anticipation of the 14C certification going down. We want to really focus on moving out of the congregate setting into individual employment.
Awesome. Thanks, Lucas. All right, looks like a lot of folks are sort of digesting, thinking things through. And I would like to, and I saw you come off mute.
I would say I also have this as a poll question, so if you all want to just answer it that way as well, it can give us a sense of where people are thinking.
And for scope, that would be scope beyond one, because everybody will receive the scope incentive for an approved plan. It's actually been okay. 656. So see here, we've got a lot of folks saying on the day transition, and that's been the case. DDS has received more day step plans than residential. Both are welcome and encouraged. A lot of agencies are doing both. So that kind of matches and makes a lot of sense based on what we've seen previously. So we do continue to do these sessions. We are also available for one-on-one sessions. So if you are one of those folks where your agency is far along, but you just got pulled into it and you have questions, you can set up time with us. We will answer any and all questions. If you are starting to think through a plan and you want confirmation on whether or not it's something that would be approved or how it fits into STEP, please reach out. We are happy to provide guidance. Or if you're in the middle of implementation and you're starting to hit some barriers and roadblocks, we can also set up time to talk through how some of that fits in. And I will flag the March 2025 deadline. So we're about a year out from when all incentives need to be sort of claimed. And that is a federal deadline because of the money sources that DDS is using. And so you'd want transitions to be completed 60 days before the end of March next year. Any questions or thoughts? Well, that ends our formal presentation for today. We will stay on the line if folks have additional questions, and we'll go ahead and stop the recording as well. But thank you so much for joining.